Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Sharon Marie Brunner has worked with the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians as an education/disabilities coordinator for the Tribal Head Start program and as an education coordinator for the Johnson O'Malley program. Sharon served as a private consultant for the Department of Health and Human Services as a federal reviewer of tribal Head Start programs in the U.S., and was a professor for the Bay Mills Community College, a tribal college. As a member of the aforementioned tribe, she served on the Child Welfare Committee for many years. Sharon has spent a good portion of her life either providing service or writing about Native Americans.
6:00 here. Welcome to the UP Notables Book Club book chat. And tonight we are going to be speaking with Sharon Brunner about her book, Michigan Indian Boarding School Survivors Speak Out. A very good read, very short. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I've got some questions, and I'm sure some other people do too. But before we get to Sharon, we always hand it over to Victor, and he gives us some UPPAA announcements. So Victor, what do you got for us tonight?
Thanks, Evelyn. For the people that are on this call, it's still possible for you to attend the UPPAA Spring Conference, which is going to be May 17th, 2025 in beautiful Marquette, Michigan at the Peter White Public Library. You can just head over to our website, www.uppaa.org, and you can join and become a member and attend the day-long conference for the low price of absolutely nothing. Yes. The conference is free to all UPPAA members. It's the best thing that we do. And it's really a lot of fun to be in a room with 100 other writers from the UP. Heck, 100 of any people at the UP. That's kind of special. So we really hope you'll consider it. Doesn't matter whether you've written anything or not. If you're planning on writing or you're a writer, we want you to be with us in Marquette on the 17th. So that's www.uppaa.org. And so your membership dues, I mean, they go to support our spring conference, but it supports a lot of other things, like the Young Writers Story Workshop, now in the second year, which is going to happen also on the 17th. And the Dandelion Cottage Short Story Contest, which is a special contest only for kids in the UP from grades 5 through 12, where they can submit their short stories and they win cash prizes and get published in the UP Reader. It's really a lot of fun. These are just two of the many programs that we sponsor, all from people joining us as members and saying, hey, we want to support literature in the UP. So that's the end of my public television type commercial. And back to you, Evelyn.
Okay.
Yes.
So UPPAA and the Crystal Falls Friends of the Library are the sponsors of these book chats. And we try to kind of give we give all of our speakers a check to thank them for their time and their hard work and for promoting everything about the UP, which is very important that we have a history of our place and our culture. And what an important book this was. I can't say enough, Sharon. I've got some questions, and I'm sure other people do too. But this is, like I said, kind of one of the more darker chapters of our history. The Michigan Indian Boarding School Survivors Speak Out. And I know I'm excited to hear more about it. So take it away, Sharon.
Okay. My name is Sharon Brunner, as on the book, this book right here. And this is my master's thesis, which I completed, I think, back in 2001. And the reason I did this project was my mother attended the boarding school, the Holy Childhood Boarding School. And so she didn't really talk about it. And so my question was, what is a boarding school? What do they do there? I mean, who goes? I mean, what happens? I didn't know anything. And I knew that it had a negative impact on my mother, but that's all I knew, and so I thought, well, let's go a little bit further. I did everything different when I went to get my degree, my master's of social work degree. My cohort, I was the only one that went to Ireland from my cohort, and and other cohorts went, but I was the only one from Sault Ste. Marie to go. And then I was the only one to do a master's thesis. They didn't have, it wasn't a requirement, but I decided I want to know about this. So I spent 16 months working on this project. And I was all over Michigan meeting with people, and like at Hasluck, Michigan, and, you know, and St. Ignace and Sugar Island, and, you know, and Sault Ste. Marie and stuff. I want to know, in Petoskey, you know, what happened? What does this mean? And then I learned a lot also by doing my literature review. And so now I want to go into Victor showing the slides, and then I'll read some quotes, okay?
Sure.
So we'll go past. You can go past this one, Victor. Next. Are you there, Victor?
Yeah, we're on the girls' dormitory right now.
Well, you might be, but that's not what we see. We're on
No,
the
we
first
see
pic-
the-
we see
we
the
see the
first
title.
picture.
Okay, sorry. Let me try again. Technical
I
difficulty.
like these technical difficulties. It gives us a chance to take a deep breath before we get into the story. But so while he's fixing that there, Sharon, did you I one of the questions I had for you is like, were you pretty surprised by things that you uncovered doing your research?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to
It
start
looks-
with that picture.
All right. Looks like it's
Okay.
working now, I think.
And I can talk above that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a quote from Kent. He attended the Holy Childhood Boarding School. We moved here, and in parentheses, I have Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, because of the situation then. It wasn't good to be an Anishinaabe. So my aunts were anything but Anishinaabe. They were French. They were Italian. They were anything, anybody that kind of had a dark color to their skin. That's what they had. They wouldn't hire my uncles at Algoma Steel or any place like that because they were Anishinaabe. It's like the language. They couldn't speak their own language. They could speak French. The French were accepted, but people still looked down on them too. No, their noses at the French a little bit too. English was a number one thing. My grandfather, who I'm putting into this other book that I'm writing, he couldn't get a job in St. Ignace unless he said he was French. And so he became a constable in St. Ignace because he said he was French. Okay, next. Victor, next.
Yeah,
Okay.
can you see it?
Yes. Trying to find something that goes with that. I would much rather been at home with mom and dad. We're fighting, drinking, and there was domestic violence, than to go through being institutionalized in a place where they tell you that you're evil. You're totally evil and nothing is ever going to save you. So you may as well as give yourself over to God and die however that God deems. Because if you don't, the devil's got you. Fear of the devil. What they made me afraid of was the dark. And this was Tim, and he went to the Holy Childhood Boarding School. Next.
Okay.
And see how close the beds are? If somebody was sick when they went to the school, everybody got sick. Okay, next.
Okay.
We're still on the dormitory.
I'm seeing the girls' dormitory, but
Nope.
how about this one?
Still on the boys' dormitory.
It works just fine.
There we go. We're here now. Okay, I'll find one that goes with girls if I can. This was from Yolanda. There was a girl that went to school there, and then they have in parentheses, Holy Childhood Boarding School, and knew not a word of English. they beat her if she would talk in her language. She would hang her head. My dad said the same thing. He would not teach us. When I heard an elder speak in the language, it took me right back to when I was a kid. That's Yolanda. She went to the Holy Childhood Boarding School. And my parents, my grandfather didn't teach his children the Ojibwe language and the French language, and just taught them English, just to save them, protect them. So it happened in my own family too. Next.
Okay,
Still got the girls' dormitory.
it should be changing to the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School.
It says girls' dormitory at Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School. Did you switch it? Is this the same, guys?
I see what Victor says, the students at the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School.
Okay, should I just say a quote with this one then?
Sure.
Okay. We really starved. Breakfast, I don't know what that was that they gave us, but there was no sugar or cream or on it or anything. Bugs were in it, and they would make us eat that. I don't remember ever having a decent meal down there. This was Brenda, and she went to the Holy Childhood Boarding School. A lot of complaints with the Holy Childhood Boarding School regarding the food. One of the persons I interviewed said that the food smelled rotten, and so it was pretty horrible. Okay, next.
Okay, this is the color shot.
You're still on the girls' dormitory.
Evelyn, can you see it?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, now it's different. Students at Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial School, they're marching. That's one of the things that I'll read you one that goes with this marching. Okay.
Sure.
Lieutenant Peterson was a real American Company C. I was at attention and he stood right in front of me and he said, "Private." And I said, "Yes, sir." "Did you ever go to West Point? Where did you get your training at?" I said, "I went to a government Indian school in Mount Pleasant, Michigan." And he was Fred from Mount Pleasant Boarding School. And so they marched to everything. They marched to go brush their teeth. They marched to go eat. They marched to go, everything they had to do, they marched. Okay. And they had to, I'll talk about other things too. They couldn't talk either. They just had to look straight ahead and, and march. And so, like he said, he got that the person thought he went to West Point because he marched so well. Okay, next.
All right, this is the last one with all the children lined up.
Okay, we're still on the students of Mount Pleasant, yeah.
Just give it a second, it'll catch up.
Okay.
Yep, I see the one I think it's the one that's on the back of the book too.
Mhm.
Yep, all the kids in front of the school.
Yeah, and I don't have that yet. What I see is the marching in Mount Pleasant Industrial Boarding School. So you're seeing a different picture?
Yes, the one that's on the back of your book.
Yeah.
And it's
Okay,
on
I
also
don't
page
see that.
52.
Okay, well, now we have the Holy Childhood of Jesus Indian School, but that's
Yep.
okay. All right. What do I want to read? I'll read one from Jeff, who went to the industrial boarding school, the federal one. The government expected the Indian to farm. They didn't know anything about farming. They put the reserve on the poorest land. But I remember my dad coming up the road with a big steelhead, that's a fish, the tail of the fish dragging in the sand. He hunted, but hunting was poor. Game was scarce. And that was Jeff. And I'm giving you names that they had, that these aren't their real names, okay? I had to change the names and when they signed the consent form. He went to the Mount Pleasant boarding school. Do we have any other pictures? Because I never got the one with the back of the kids, all the kids on the back. We never got that one yet.
One we're looking at.
You guys
That's the
saw it,
one-
but I didn't see it.
That's the one we see now.
See, and
No.
I have a buildings. Okay.
Maybe it's cropped off on your screen or something, but
I don't know. Okay.
anyway, that's the end of the
Can
slides.
you bring the children up again or somehow?
Well, I can
We
go
see
back
them.
to the beginning.
And I don't see it. And I don't know why. View options. I'll hit view options and see what happens. Nothing. I'll read one more quote to go with the children on the back of the book, okay? Even though I
Yeah.
see buildings.
But we see the children.
And I'm seeing buildings. Okay. Oh, that's kind of harsh. Are you ready for a harsh one? They took you in front of everybody, laid you across the bed, and used a rubber hose, as young as you were, when you wet the bed. And she was Jennifer, who attended the Holy Childhood boarding school. Okay, so we're done with the slides.
Yep, I'm turning it off, turning the slides off.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Victor. Can I give a little spiel now about my book?
Yes, please.
About the interviews and things? Okay. It was a master's thesis, so I had a process, okay? So I had to find out who can I interview, and the hardest ones to find were the ones that attended the federal boarding school, because that closed in 1933. And so I was able to find 3, okay, which is pretty lucky. Doris, who was one of the persons I interviewed, she was 91 when I interviewed her, you know, and but the other 2 were in their 80s. And I want to tell you, and so there was differences, and so I'll talk about the differences when I get to the Holy Childhood boarding school between the federal and the Holy Childhood. They did not mind being sent to the school, the 3 that attended the federal boarding school. Jeff was happy to be, you know, in a place where he could get food, and his home was warm. You know, where he lived, there was holes in the walls, and it was cold, and wind came in, and then his dad spent the paycheck in the bar, you know, and so food was limited. And so he was happy to be at a school where he got 3 meals a day, you know, and he had friends to play with, and he had clothes to wear, and he learned, he was really proud of this stuff. He learned a craft. He learned how to cut hair. You know, they trained you at the federal boarding school on how to do things, you know, like cut hair and other jobs and stuff. And so he learned a lot of money when he was in the service cutting people's hair, you know, and he liked that. He had money in his pocket, you know. And then Fred, who I talked about earlier too, he was sent there because the family was very poor, but he only went there for 1 year. But he didn't mind going either. He liked having the 3 meals a day. He liked having clothes to wear. One of his complaints was they were very, very poor. They went out to pick blueberries every summer and earned approximately $70, and that had to get them through the winter, you know. And back then, you know, and he's this was 2000, and he was 80, so, you know, maybe 1920, 1930, you know, but things are really tight, you know, and a pair of jeans cost like $1.25, but that was a lot of money when you only had $70 to spend, you know. And so they would pick blueberries out at Rayco area. I don't know if you know this area, but it's out like west of me, about 20 miles or so west of the Sioux. And they stay there the whole summer and sell them to the people that were cutting wood, the lumber people, okay, that were cutting wood out there. So he was happy to have the 3 square meals a day and all the other things. And so only going a year, and he learned how to march like he went to West Point, you know. And then Doris, she was happy to learn all these skills that she learned, you know, to be a housemaker, a homemaker. And she didn't really have a whole lot of friends, and just cleaning and stuff was her thing. Now I get to the, I gotta get a drink of water. And she was really happy to be working at the staff's table and stuff. That means that she did a really good job. And then we get to the Holy Childhood boarding school and those interviews, okay? Every one of them resented being sent, all 6 of them. 5 of the 6 had the same phobia, fear of the dark. And one was locked in the basement in the dark. The other one, you know, she thought the school was huge and she heard crying each night. And then the other one reported that he was terrified by, you know, being told about the devil and things. And a common complaint at the Holy Childhood Boarding School, which is pretty horrible, is either you knew a child being hauled off at night, for what, or you were one of those children. And so I think that's caused some of their fear too, fear of the dark and stuff like that, because they probably didn't want to be hauled off, and they hated the food at the school. 5 experienced poverty, and then they had mixed messages about religion. And then with this place, they also suffered from identity confusion. Who am I? Why are they telling me all this stuff? Why are they telling me I'm bad, and not worth things? And then I'll go over some of the interviews. We have time, right?
Yes.
Can address a harsh discipline, and communication with parents was censored. He thought some of the nuns were actually sadistic. He was not permitted to speak his native language, and he became aggressive and developed a resistance to authority, and he suffered identity confusion. Yolanda gave me such a great interview. She reported being pulled around by the hair, and when at the board trying to do math, the nun would pull her hair, and she said one side of her head, her hair is thinner than the other side from the boarding school, and that's still to this day. She talked to me and told me that they could speak volumes with their eyes because they couldn't communicate. They couldn't talk. So they could speak volumes with their eyes. And so if somebody was sent to bed without dinner, they would look at someone and say, make sure she gets something, because they were already underfed because they worked so hard and the meals were not great there, and so going without food, that's not good. Yolanda refused promotions if they involved budgets because she developed a fear of math because she wasn't good at math, and she got her hair pulled a lot because she couldn't do math. She developed strong alliances with other children, at the school. And she talked about how each one supported her. Like, think about tapping a eraser very quietly on your desk, telling her that we're there for you. They couldn't really tell her they were there for her, but just being told by just listening to a small, tapping of an eraser on the desk. She said, and I asked another elder this question too. She says if she passes someone on the street and they look at each other, they can tell automatically that they went to the same place by just the look in their eyes. Okay, that's how much it's set with them. Brenda, she mentioned harsh discipline. She does not. She talked about the food having bugs in it. That's where that quote came from. But she would pull some pranks on the nuns because the nuns wanted them to look all nice going to church on Sunday morning with their frilly little lace hats and things. But they would secretly tear holes in their tights, and rip a dress. And when they're saying their song, they would sing it off key in church just to embarrass the nuns. And they would throw their heads back and their hats would fly off. So they liked playing those games. Okay. I mean, they may have gotten punished later on, but they had fun doing it, if that makes sense. Am I going too fast? Understandable?
Perfect.
Okay.
Just perfect.
Tim, he was sick a lot at the school, and he said that school ruined him. He suffered from humiliation. When he wet the bed, he had to wear his bed sheets on his head, and they put a diaper on him and made him stand in line for food with a diaper on. And here he's a child, like an older child, 5 and above, when he stood in the food line. As that quote, he'd rather be home with, alcoholism and domestic violence and be in that. He called it a hellhole, okay? He referred to the school as a hellhole. And okay, we'll move on to Jennifer. And she was beaten with a rubber hose when she wet the bed. She said she was only 6 when she went there, and she went there a year. And the children had to clean the floors with kerosene rags. And then one of the people talked about, I think it was Brenda, and I didn't mention it, when they had lice, they used kerosene on their heads to kill the lice. And that burned their heads, it made their eyes water. It was horrible. She's only 6. She attended a year. Her older sister was there when she was attending. So her older sister kind of made sure she was okay as much as she could. And Diane, she had an easier time because her family had money. So her family gave money to the school. So they pretty much, like, she was one of the favored children, that because the family had money. But she still talked about how horrible the food was and that she became aggressive towards other children, watching all that aggression and things. And so that's kind of my report. I can talk on about everything. Jeff was really funny. Before the interview with Jeff, Jeff lived in Haslett, Michigan. That's kind of by Lansing, down there somewhere. And I called him up and he says, well, Sharon, I will give you 2 hours. 2 hours, that's it. I'm going turkey hunting. And so when we met that day, 5 hours later, I'm trying to get away and getting hungry and tired. And he's still talking. But what I found out, when they had people listening to them about these things, they wanted to continue talking. Fred, I had to go back to his home twice. I had to go to his home twice because he had more to tell me. They wanted to share these things. They wanted to talk, and it just ended up, I was surprised about some of the stuff, how harsh it was. I was surprised at the federal boarding school. They wanted to go. They liked it. They didn't mind it, and they didn't resent it. I was surprised at all the big difference between the 2 schools. There was a huge difference. One was religion-based. One was more like just a school, They went to church like on Sundays, but it wasn't where every day they went to church. And that confusion, 2 or 3 people mentioned to me, they were so confused because they're being taught all this religion, but at the same time, the people who are teaching it are being mean, they're being sadistic, so there's a lot of confusion about the religion, Okay. Any questions? I can't hear you,
Hello,
Evelyn.
can you hear me? This is Adrienne Christian.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. But it looks like Adrian has a question.
Okay.
Okay, this might be a little bit controversial. I am a student, an auditing student at the Keweenaw Bay Community Native College in it's in Lawrence, Michigan. But there, just down the road from me in Asinnins, there was an Indian boarding school. Now, I have been studying this in my classes for maybe 2.5 years. We talked so much about the boarding school situation. Now, this is something that keeps going through my mind because I was born and raised and went through the Catholic school system in Chicago, Illinois. And I do remember nuns coming to our school and trying to gather young girls to join the convent. And they were in charge of boarding schools out west. So I've studied boarding schools throughout the country. What I cannot understand in growing up Catholic is that nuns are considered the brides of Christ, and priests have hands that are consecrated so that they can perform the sacraments. But these nuns and priests defile these children brutally. I mean, you have skimmed the surface of what they have done to these children. And that is something you can't get the nuns and the priests, well, most of them are long gone by now. But that is something that amazes me, that you would take vows to do God's work and yet to be so cruel to these children. And a lot of these children were 5 years old when they were taken. There were political reasons.
Some were 3 and 4.
Right. Now, can you
Yeah.
imagine? Can you imagine? And then we've studied so much the psychological effects of these schools. Um, um, we talk a lot about the trauma that gets passed down from generation to generation. And here's one reason why. If you are a child of that age and you are taken away from your mommy and daddy, and you go away to one of these schools, you don't experience the love of a family. You don't know what it's like to have a mommy or daddy console you at night or teach you things during the day. Therefore, when you grow up, you don't know how to be a mommy and daddy yourself. And that gets passed on from generation to generation. And I have heard people of younger generations in my classes complain about their parents being just terrible parents. But because they're understanding this trauma, they're understanding better why mommy and daddy behave that way. So, I mean, there is just so much awfulness that has happened because of these boarding schools. But getting back to, I just don't understand why these men and women, why they were so cruel to these children. So if anyone wants to have any input on
Well,
that.
if you go back into history, Native Americans were considered not completely whole people. Like they're half
Right.
people. Like, they didn't deserve respect. They didn't deserve,
Right.
I don't know how to explain it. Just like
Oh, you're
African
saying
American
it.
people and Native American people of color were treated like they didn't matter. They were less than human, and so they get these kids in there and they think they're heathens and they think they have to really, slam in the religion and things like that. Now, not every nun and priest were bad. There were good ones too. There were some good ones, not everybody was bad. So I don't want to paint that picture, but there were some pretty bad ones that made a lot of impact on it. But you're taking these children out of their home and you're placing these children into foreign environments. If they spoke the Ojibwe language, they couldn't speak it there, and so they couldn't speak their own language. They're with strangers and these strangers aren't very nice. And a child needs, like if a child is crying in their bed at night, they need someone to take care of them. But that didn't happen, in these schools. They were by themselves. I didn't cover this, but read it last night. Yolanda said that she would not cry, no matter how badly they treated her. She would not let them see her tears. She would wait till she went to bed at night to cry, because they were not going to break her. She was not going to let them see that. So there's a lot of strength there too, and they had to take care of themselves. They were by themselves. They didn't have a parent to rely on, say, Mom, I'm hurting today, or I need a hug, They didn't have that.
But
So
can you see, people say, well, there's so much alcoholism and there's so much drug use. These people, even of, these younger generations, they don't have a foundation, a moral foundation that they can look back upon to formulate their own values in life, even in these younger generations, because their parents did not have that in their youth. And it goes back and back and back. So the boarding school system was a complete.
It was the most damaging thing that's happened to Native Americans. It was the boarding school system. Most damaging thing. What happened to, can I explain something when somebody was there for years? If somebody spent a lot of years at a boarding school, like let's say 5 or 6, are getting out to go to high school now, because they didn't have high school in the boarding school. They had to go to public school to get that, not Holy Childhood at least, okay? And so they had to go to public school. Well, they get out of being trained and brainwashed and told that they're evil and blah, 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 you know, and everything else. And then and they're almost turned into like white kids, okay, like white thinking and things. And they come back to their family, and they're strangers to their family members. They don't fit in with their family even. They don't fit in anywhere. And so what a lot of these kids did, you know, was let's find someone to accept us. So they would start partying and going with, you know, wild kids and things like that. And a lot of teenage pregnancies because of that, just to fit in somewhere, because they didn't fit in with their family. And then one of the people I interviewed, she said her parents and her younger siblings that didn't go to boarding school, because not all kids all from one family would go to boarding school too. Okay, some of the older ones would go, but not some of the younger ones and stuff. They would take off on, you know, and go someplace without me. Didn't even mention it to me. They would just take off and go, you know. And can you imagine how that person felt? That she didn't fit in with her own family because she was different. She was completely different from them. They were reprogrammed. Okay, any other?
They lost a lot of their culture, their heritage, and the language is really very, very difficult to find people who are able to speak the language. Let other people talk then.
That's okay. That's okay. You said important things, and I'm glad that you're doing that study. My book is actually being used in Lansing right now too, because they're doing a study on the boarding schools in Lansing, Michigan. So I'm kind of happy about that, you know, and I know some of the people that are part of that committee.
The last Secretary of the Interior was Native American, and she and her the next person down, they conducted big studies from Washington, D.C. Now, I don't know if that study is still being carried on with the new Secretary of the Interior. Canada has done so much research into this that they have reimbursed people if you can reimburse a, you know, a sexual assault victim or so. And there was one person in my class who is Canadian, and she received a check of $120,000 because of her ancestors being in the boarding school. But I don't know if that is still being looked into within the United States. So let the other people.
No, we have never received a public apology or any acknowledgement. You know, and that's been stated. When I did a book signing on last Saturday in Brimley, and somebody stopped and talked to me about that. It says, yeah, there's never been an apology. I really appreciate talking to you, Adrienne.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing everything up.
Good points.
I'm sorry to talk so much, but I've been studying this
No,
for
that's okay.
3 years, and I have a whole library in my house on these boarding schools. And
oh, you should see the books I have.
And I had wanted to join that order of nuns. And I said, if I join, can I go west? You had, I guess these nuns either went to the west or to the south. And the sister that was there said, no, you have to listen to your superior. And you might be sent to the south and you would have to obey. And so I said, well, I'm not going to join because I want to go out west. And so I never became one of those nuns, but those schools were throughout this country. And the stories, the one that occurred here in that was here in a
I think there's like 500 schools, approximately 500 throughout the United States.
I talked to somebody whose mother went to the Asinnens Catholic school, and she said that the nuns would take you, the little girls, into the bathroom, and if you know those old sinks, what were they made out of? But underneath the bowl of the sink, it was kind of bubbly or rough, and they would rub the little girls' hands on that rough surface to punish them. And the kids were so hungry that they'd be working out in the garden and they would be picking raw potatoes and eating them out in the gardens.
Mhm.
The
They didn't get enough
stories,
food to eat.
right?
I wrote that in my book too, how much food they got and how hungry they were and how much money was allotted for food even. It was minimal, minimal. So it's just they worked really hard because like I said in my book, the beginning, how it started with Pratt and, Florida, where he took these prisoners and they had to work at the place, and they learned trades and things like that. Well, that's how they did the boarding schools. The kids are going to help with the maintenance. They're going to be cleaning and, working in the yard and everything else in the gardens and, and helping to run it to cut on the costs and things. And so, but they're underfed and they're overworked, they're for little kids.
Does anyone else want to say something?
Any questions? I can't hear you, Evelyn.
We're gonna start with John and then we're gonna move to Ann.
Okay, John.
I had a question.
Okay, John, you have to unmute your computer. We'll go to Ann and then to John.
Okay. I wondered if you had interviewed anybody from the religious institutions that ran these schools. And I know Methodists ran one, Catholics certainly did. And has there been any repentance on their part?
No, I didn't interview anybody that worked at the schools.
Okay.
Yeah, I just interviewed the people because it's a master's of social work degree. I care about the people that, went through the process. So no, I didn't interview the people that work there. And given the time, like my mom attended in the 1940s, I don't know if they would be even around, some of them.
No.
But yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, John, you're still muted. You have to unmute. We can't hear you. Yeah, John, on the bottom of your computer, if you put your cursor down there where it says audio, you can click on that and unmute yourself.
Am I on now?
You are on.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi, John.
Hi, Sharon. I wanted to just make a couple of observations. First of all, about Deb Haaland, who was the Secretary of the Interior. She is now one of the candidates for the governor of New Mexico. So that we're very proud of her. I did want to tell you about an Indian school story I heard. I met a lady who was doing a thesis on a 19th century Indian school somewhere in the South, and the kids had come from all over, not just Anishinaabe or Potawatomi, but from all places. And they couldn't speak to each other, let alone speak English. Well, one of the kids' father was a chief in the Seminole tribe, and he died, and the kid had to be sent home. But they couldn't find the right kid, and they sent the wrong kid to
Oh
Florida.
my goodness.
That's just an example. But the other thing, it struck me as I was listening to you and as I read the book, they tried to, quote, kill the Indian, but they didn't want them to become white people. They wanted them to be maids and laundresses and weeders in the garden. There was no sense to, they destroyed one side, but didn't open the gates to the other side, it seemed to me.
Mm-hmm. No, they're supposed to be like almost like slaves,
Yes,
the
yes.
farmers and
Mhm,
maids and things like that.
mhm, mhm.
But the federal boarding school
This,
trained them to do other things and not do just that, barbering and stuff
yes,
like that. But the
yes,
Holy Childhood, no, you're going to be either a housemaid or a, farmer or whatever.
yeah.
So you're right,
This would
John.
be a this would be a wonderful young adult novel for you to write.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Arthur Eastman did a book, the Lakota author who became a doctor in the early 20th century, but he wrote a book called Indian School Days. And Jamaica Highwater, who pretended to be Native, whether he was or wasn't, has done another Indian School Days book. But this would be a wonderful one. You have the modern perspective, you have the research, and this a story of somebody trying to say, who am I? Where do I belong? Would be a wonderful story for younger people to get a sense of what happened. That's just a recommendation.
Okay. But I have another task coming up. I'm going to be telling somebody's life story, an elder, a tribal elder. So I have to listen to cassette tapes and,
Okay, all
so
right.
after that, maybe, okay?
All right.
Yeah, but, yeah, young adults. Just maybe explaining why parents are the way they are, maybe too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It
Because
would
they
be
learn how to
great.
parent from the boarding schools. Can you imagine?
I, as Adrian said, they took a whole generation away from learning what it was like to live as children in
Mhm.
the family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To be a
But
child.
anyway, thank you. I loved the book. I not loved the book. It wasn't a book to love, but it was a book to be
No.
deeply moving.
No, that wasn't my intention, John. My
No,
intention
no,
was to say, what is boarding schools? What are boarding
yes,
schools?
I
That's
know.
why I
Yes,
went into it,
it, it was
I
deeply
mean, I
moving.
did extensive, lit review and
Yeah,
everything else, literature
yes,
review and everything, but I learned what they were,
yes, that's right.
and I
Yes.
learned through the people who attended,
Hmm,
from the
hmm.
people who attended. Tell
Well,
me
I look.
about, and then my days, if I can talk about the process for a minute.
Sure.
I ask very open-ended questions. Tell me
Mhm,
about your childhood. Tell me about your boarding school experience.
mhm,
Tell me about your family, so very open-ended questions.
mhm,
And that one elder would be taking me down the railroad tracks in a horse-drawn, wagon. He was going to
mhm,
the
mhm,
blueberry patch to pick blueberries, but I didn't know where he would take me half the time. He would
mhm,
take me places. And
mhm, mhm.
I like seeing how it would just open up by just giving those open-ended questions, and no right or wrong answer. Just tell me what's on your mind.
That leads
So
me to a question that I had. Did you find in interviewing these individuals that any of them were holding back? Like perhaps something did happen to them, but they didn't want to say?
if you know me, I'm the type of person that strangers come and tell me their life story.
Okay.
So no,
Okay.
they told me, because that's the kind of person I am, where people, like I said, strangers will come up to me and, and set me down and say, I have to tell you this, and so I have that kind of personality and that way about me that people just open up. And so, no, they're pretty, honest about things. I don't think they held back.
Okay.
And so I didn't say everything there. There was some harsher things and stuff, but yeah, they pretty much let me know, you know, but that's my personality too, you know.
Now,
So any other questions?
did you note about how many children actually died being away from their, can you imagine dying without your mommy or daddy being with you, or else the unexplained pregnancies that these young girls endured, and what happened to those babies? So I mean, this gets horrific when you get
And
into.
where were all the children buried that died at Holy Childhood Boarding School? They're finding them now in Canada at the Algonquin, Algoma,
Mhm.
but where did they bury them? And a lot died from illnesses and things, We have a lot to do here yet, in Michigan and other places.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a
Mhm.
pretty lonely life for them. A lot of them complained about homesickness. A lot of them were very homesick. Like the one Tim says, I'd rather be home with domestic violence and stuff than do this, They're my
Mhm.
parents.
But it's like adopted children who wonder about, where did I come from to begin with? These children are wondering, so what's my culture anyway? Because
Mhm.
it's unfortunately they've lost so much of it. Mm-hmm.
You can't describe that. He went through identity confusion because what are they trying to make me into? What is this
Oh,
all about? I have a family at home. I've listened to legends. I've spoken the language. I've gone to sweat lodges. I have gone, done all kinds of things that, that's traditional. What are they trying to teach me? Who am I now? What's happening? He went through a lot of identity confusion, and how he dealt with it in his adult life, he returned back to his culture. He said, I'm going to return back to being a Native American and speaking the language. And when I went there to interview him, he said every day he teaches himself a new word, a new
mm,
Ojibwe word. Isn't
mm-hmm,
that cool? you
mm-hmm.
know and so every day he makes that a goal. And so I had a lot of neat interviews, and like I said, normally you'd think a couple hours. I was there a lot of times 4 hours, 6 hours. They wanted to talk, and I kind of thought that it would be a neat job to just go and listen to these people sometime and just let them talk, and play games with them or whatever, because if somebody wants to hear them, and talk. And I shared that story about seeing somebody on the street and knowing that they attended that place. So right off the bat, by just looking in their eyes. And John, who I'm doing this book for, um, telling his life story, said, "Oh my God, yes, that has happened to me." And they couldn't talk. So they had to talk with their eyes a lot, and so they learned how to, I guess, and it kind of stayed with them, that experience. And that, I don't know how
I'm
to
very,
explain it, but
I'm very surprised that you got people to talk to you because in my classes, our professor has said it is very difficult to have many of these people say anything about their experiences because they were so awful. And when I suggested
it's
a
just,
course
I think it's
on,
my personality.
Mhm, mhm. I suggested a course on the boarding schools, and I was met with a
I
lot of
think it's my
opposition.
personality. They all talk to me freely.
Hmm.
Some I had to go back twice. They weren't done with me after 4 hours. They weren't done with me. They wanted me back.
Hmm.
So, so
Great.
they talked to me,
Sharon,
and
Do you think that because you're Anishinaabe, that made it easier for them to talk to you than if you'd been just an anthropologist?
well, and they also knew that my mother went, and
Uh-huh.
that it was part of my life, and I
Mhm.
want to know about this,
Mhm.
and just, there's no wrong answers. I just want to know,
Mhm.
and please tell me what you know and what your experience was like, and please open that door
Mhm.
for me. I want to know, you know
Mhm.
and so and they, like I said, some of the interviews are pretty long,
Mhm.
and I had to go back. He wasn't done with me. But then,
Mhm.
like Jeff, he got me and he got my attention. I even went out to his deer blind because he had me all over the place,
Uh-huh.
talking to me and showing me everything about his life, and
Yes.
and he just wanted to communicate, and somebody was listening to something that was very important in his life. So no, they
Mhm.
they all talked freely to me. I don't
Mhm.
feel like they held back, and they shared stories and they shared, I
Mhm.
probably should be doing this all over the place, right? But I don't have time. But
Mhm.
it's like, but I was able to do this. Okay.
Yeah.
And the person I'm writing the review, his story on, he's been to the boarding school, the same boarding school. And
Mhm.
he's
Mhm.
also on the tribal board of directors. And he was raised traditionally, and he still lives in his traditional home that they was raised in Hessel, Michigan. I don't know if you know where Hessel is, but it's by Cedarville. I don't
Mhm.
know if you know where that is, but and
Where
so
the
and he still
schoolhouse
lives
is.
there,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And so, and he wants to meet with me,
Mhm.
and he liked that I asked that question about when you notice somebody on the street and you could look at them and you could tell you went to the same place. It brought tears to his daughter and I's eyes when he said yes, and how I responded to that. It's like, oh my gosh, and then he was being heard. Oh my God, she knows what I've been through. She knows this. She knows the questions to ask. He wants to meet with me all the time, and call him and stuff. And it's like, wish there's 5 of me, But my husband said no 5, no more than 1. I'm a bit much for him, but anyways. But he's saying no more than 1. But I'm thinking sometimes I could be, it would be nice to have more of me. But yeah. So any other questions?
Any other questions or comments? Okay, one from Sue.
This is a delight. I'm so glad to get to see you again, at least on the screen.
I'll see you next week too, probably, right?
Yay! Hope so. That'll be fun. Are
you taking my workshop?
Yes, I am in your workshop. Yes, for sure. I think this is probably another byproduct of the schools, and really, even reading your book, which I read last year when it first came out, and gave it away on my blog because I thought it was such an important book, such an absolutely important book, and I don't know of any of my family that went to boarding schools, but I do know that my family tried to pretend not to be Native. And my grandfather looked extraordinarily Native. And I wondered from the time I was a little child, and I'd say to him, "Are we Indian, Grandpa?" And of course, look at me. I'm as white as my Scots grandmother. And he'd say, "Oh no, we're French. Oh no, we're French," because it was a shameful thing. And some of his sisters said, "Oh no, our grandma Sarah had quite a lot of Indian blood." And I have spent years and years and years trying to trace, found it in other links, but not through hers. And I think that shame is horrible. I think it just absolutely shreds families. And until you do research to find the truth, which for me finally proved out in DNA, and the percentage of DNA that I have that is Native, but which shocked the heck out of me because I don't look Native, but evidently you don't have to look Native to have some percentage. But we still learn things. My father was very careful to take us out into the woods and show us how to walk without making noise. And I know now, because of my own studying, that we punished by traditional Native means, which before alcohol was isolation. It wasn't hitting, and we did that in my family. It's like, until you can behave yourself, you go in your room and you shut the door and you stay there. And when you think you can be nice, you come out. But that isolation away from family is really a very effective punishment, especially when you're a little child. And all those things were lost, and people were ashamed. And it just breaks my heart that people were ashamed. No, we're not. We weren't. We aren't. And it wasn't really until the 70s that families started to go back and try to find out the truth. And it's very difficult to do. It's almost impossible in some cases. But your book is a treasure in many ways, but it's lifting the shame. It's lifting the shame. I think sometimes before the shame lifts, you have to have some anger. And then you get through the anger with wisdom. And, thank you. Thank you for that book. I'm so grateful for it. Loves me.
Well,
Well-
Victor's the one who contacted me and say, can I publish your master's thesis? Okay.
That's
So
his history.
he's to blame. Can I add something else? People, I know it's almost 8. I wrote a self-help book addressing historical trauma. Okay. And part of the self-help book is I suggested that you find out your roots. You find out where you came from to give you a sense of belonging. Okay. And that makes sense, doesn't it, Sue?
Very wise.
Can I add?
Yeah. Give yourself a sense of belonging. Find your roots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Say something? I back in hippie days, I was a history major, but nowhere in all of my studies of history, are we still on? Nowhere in my
I think
studies
so.
of history did I hear anything about Native American history, because American history starts in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And where in American history books in schools these days does it talk about the Native American who had been here thousands of years with civilizations that were productive, and then they omit all of that. So right from 1492, the American Indian is not recognized as being important. They're savages. And I find it a great fault. I feel that I have been robbed of a huge part of our nation's history through my education. And I don't know how anyone is ever going to correct this.
I know, and that's why I wanted to know a big part of my history, because my mom went to the boarding school. What does that mean? What is it? That was my question. That's why I started that project. That's why I did that master's thesis. What is a boarding school? I had no idea what it meant. Now I do, but I had no idea before I started. I had a great committee that worked with me, because I was working on my master's of social work degree, and they were very curious too. And nobody has ever done a study that they compared the federal versus the missionary boarding school experiences. Nobody's ever done that I know of. And it demonstrated a lot of new information, didn't it? And I wish I could have met with more from the federal, but like I said, it closed in 1933, so I was lucky to get 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to kind of mirror one of the things Sue said. I think it's a very important book, Sharon, and what I really enjoy about it is it's not you bring up like some, how do I say this? Like the possibility that it wasn't a bad experience, like with some of your people that you interviewed. And you also brought up on the other side some things that I wasn't aware of, particularly when it came to the nuns, like just kind of new information there. We hear often about priests and things, but so it was good because it was very, very well rounded, the information. And I think it's an important book. And I would imagine you're kind of, I'm predicting you're on the forefront, that there will be more books like this, that I think hopefully we will catch up to our neighbors in Canada and kind of start doing some of the things that they've done as far as reconciliation. And I think people will be using your book in years to come. And I do really appreciate all of you for coming on tonight. And it's an important book, and I'm glad that we read it. If you haven't read it, I think you should. Any concluding comments from you, Victor?
I would say if you want to talk more to Sharon Brunner, come join us at Marquette a week from Saturday, 17th.
Sounds good. Yep. So thank you all. Next month, we're going to meet to talk about, it's a novel, The Last Huck. And that will be always on the second Tuesday at 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern. We do hope some of you new people stick with us next month, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sharon, so much for
Tyler has a
speaking.
message too. Thanks, Tyler.
Yep.
Very
And
Hi,
thanks.
Sue.
Nice to see everyone tonight, and we'll see many of you at the conference, and the rest of you, hopefully we'll see you next month.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upa.org or www.upnotable.com.